Down from the hill and down to the world. Radyo-Katipunan, the voice of the Blue Eagle. Tara na't simulan ng inyong umaga sa mga magagandang refleksyon tungkol sa ating buhay at pananampalataya. Kasama sina Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, Father J. Boy Gonzales at Father Nono Alfonso ng Kapisanan ni Jesus, Father Cali Llamado ng Manila Cathedral at Binibining Risa Sinson Kaupeng ng Light of Jesus Community dito sa Kapit Pandasal sa radyo-katipunan 87.9 FM.
Babalikan ka niya. Magandang araw po sa inyo. Kape at pandasal na po tayo. Ito po si Cardinal Chito Tagle. Nakadudurog ng puso kapag oras ng sumakay sa eroplano at maririnig mo sa isang inang OFW ang pangako sa anak na kausap sa telepono. Babalik si nanay, huwag kang mag-alala, magpapakabait ka ha. Ito rin ang pangako sa asawa, kasintahan o magulang na maiiwanan. Pansamantala lamang ang paghihiwalay, babalikan ka. Nakakabawas ito ng pighati, dulot ng paghihiwalay. Ipinangako ni Jesus sa mga alagad niya bago siya namatay na babalik siya upang isama sila saan man siya naroon. Alam nating si Jesus ay nasa piling ng Diyos. Babalik siya upang ihatid tayo sa Ama. Ito ang matibay na pag-asa natin. Makalimutan ka mang balikan ng mga nangako sa iyo, si Jesus hindi makakalimot. Babalik siya, makakasama natin siya. O Diyos, salamat sa katapatan ni Jesus sa amin. Amen.
Radyo, 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 katipunan, radyo, katipunan, radyo, katipunan, radyo, 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 katipunan, radyo, katipunan. Voice of the Blue Eagle, kami di mapipigil sa pagbabalitang tumpak at tama. Buhay atin sa labas ng eskwela, ating ibibida lahat ng eskwela. Radyo, radyo, katipunan, radyo, radyo, katipunan, radyo, katipunan, katipunan. Kawan ni Ignacio, katipunero sugo, todo sa kayod, tunong at tulong. Lipad na Blue Eagle, galing hiding at tigil.
The Jesuit Hour. Get to know the Jesuits. Discover their spirituality, their history, their ministries. The Jesuit Hour. Anything Jesuit, everything Jesuit. The Jesuit Hour.
Good morning mga katipuneros. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Welcome to our show here at Radyo Katipunan 87.9 FM, the Ateneo Campus Radio. This is the Jesuit Hour and I'm your host, Father Nono Alfonso SJ. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. And please join us dahil ngayon po ay kasama natin ang isa sa mga wisdom figures namin, mga Jesuita. That means ang dami niya na pong karanasan sa buhay and of course, matalino po itong mga kausap natin. And we will talk about yung po mga pinag-uusap-usapan natin ngayong mga araw na ito, and you know what that is. To give us, for him to shed light to, well, the darkness that we're experiencing now, for lack of a term, yung mga, nararanasan nating kalungkutan ngayon. I'm sure we will learn from him, some insights, and meron po siyang advice sa atin, how to move on, how to continue, carry on. So yan po, abangan niyo po yan. But before we talk to our guest for the day, magdasal muna pa tayo in the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord, we ask you to be with us as we continue to grapple with the elections, as we continue to grapple with the future, with our fears about the future. Please be with us, Lord. Send your Spirit to open our hearts and our minds. We ask this through Christ, our Lord. Amen. And the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, to introduce our guest for this morning, ito po sabi ko na nga, pinagpipitaganan ng mga Jesuita. He was provincial superior of the Jesuits in the Philippines. He was also president of the Ateneo de Manila University. He continues to teach math. Nako, math, most difficult subject. Ngayon po, patuloy siya nagtuturo. Swerte ng mga natuturuan niya ngayon. Patuloy siya nagtuturo ng math sa Ateneo po. And on the side, he has so many social action projects. Nariyan na po ang Gawad Kalinga. Meron din po siyang napakalaking feeding program. And at one time, we were able to talk about that here in this show. So my dear friends, please welcome to the show ang tinatawag po naming Panginoon. Wala pong iba kundi si Father Bienvenido Nebres of the Society of Jesus, si Father Ben. Good morning, Father Ben.
Thank you very much, Nono. Thank you for a very kind introduction.
Yes, Father Ben, so how are you after the elections and with the results of the elections? Kumusta po kayo?
Well, unfortunately, it was expected, but still, I worry about the future. Maybe that's the main thing. I worry about the future.
And siguro po the first question that I'd like to ask after that general kumusta is, you did not vote for BBM. You were a signatory to a statement of the Jesuits that favored a Lenny Robredo, no? Why is that, Father? How do you explain that?
Well, first on the personal level, I do not know Bongbong well, but I have no clear evidence of competence on his part. I have not seen that in his previous positions as well, and I do see more competence in the case of Lenny Robredo, while I do not know Lenny so well, I knew her husband very, very well. Really, Jesse was a wonderful person. And very clearly, Lenny is the same as him in his caring for the poor. I work a lot in Mindanao with Jesse, and I've seen the same care and compassion for our poor countrymen with Jesse and with Lenny, which is for me very central since that's the majority of our country. So I will certainly always go for a candidate that I see has a priority for the poor.
Amen. Father, I have to point out, kailangan po malaman ng ating mga tagapakinig at tagapanood that you are an Ilocano yourself. But
oh yes, of course.
You did not favor a fellow Ilocano.
Oh yeah, but well, anyway, not all Ilocanos have the same views of the Marcoses. No?
Mm-hmm. Father, can you tell us about that? You were provincial during martial law. What was your experience of the Marcos regime, the martial law era?
Well, as many people say, there was really the problem of you call also arrest, search, and seizure order. In other words, you could just be arrested without any habeas corpus or lawyers, and many people were arrested that way, and some were tortured. Some very good friends of mine in the academic world tortured and suffered a lot. No, so that's one, and I think this is well-known people. But on the economic front, I also saw the cronies of President Marcos at that time really trying to control all businesses. No, we had this very unusual meeting in the Ateneo Graduate School of Business, where one of the participants said, "Advice: how do you grow a business, but not grow it so big that it becomes noticed?" Because sabi niya, if it becomes noticed, you get a proposal for a partnership, 60-40%, 60% them and 40% you. So it was also the economic. I think part of the period of Marcos was not simply political power, but economic power, meaning that really they would not allow any big, powerful economic, like the Lopez's, they would not allow that because. And so a lot of people have to grow. But one of the tragedies for me personally is because of the 20 years of Marcos' rule. A new generation of political leaders had no chance to grow. And so one of the deficits we had when EDSA happened is that the only experienced politicians were the older ones. If you remember in the elections at that time, most of those who won were the older politicians. They were the only one. The younger ones just had no way to learn along the way, and maybe we haven't totally overcome that yet. So that's something that is often not discussed, but I saw that very personally. So that's one, and so the experience was really of a limbo. We were in limbo. We could not grow economically, and the development of a younger generation of leaders was stifled, and those who really opposed were imprisoned or tortured or killed. So,
Father, you were at that time provincial, right, of the Philippine province.
Yes.
And can you share any? Kasi sikat na sikat po dito yung si Father Archie Entengan, of course. People know about that he you tried to parang sinundo nyo pa po, Father, something like that.
Well, I work with Father Archie, in other words, as well as with the leaders of, so that was PDSP, Partido Demokratiko Socialista ng Pilipinas, as well as with Lakas Diwa and with Kasapi, those are also Ateneo Jesuit related groups. But I could not be too overt. I was dean of the Ateneo College, and I knew they were recruiting students from Ateneo College, and I was quite aware of that. And to protect everybody in the college, I actually had to keep very clear protocols with them. Mm-hmm. So from each of the groups, I would only have one person to approach me. Father Archie, of course, with the DSP. I'd have a designated person for Lakas Diwa and a designated person for Sapi, for their protection and for mine, no? And for our students. So, but I kept in touch with them all through that period because you have to remember that we were in the fight against martial law. We were really engaged with two groups, and the one under martial law regime, but on the other hand, the Communist Party, the National Democratic Front. And while I agreed with the National Democratic Front on economic reforms and social reform, we did not agree on the dictatorship of the proletariat and that they would be a dictatorship. So we also did believe in democratic reform. So it was very crucial on the one hand, while when we push social reform, it was very crucial to separate our point of view from that of the National Democratic left. No? And so in the work with the students, you are always balancing those two. You have to be able to move to protect them. We send them a lot to the field. I have to tell Ateneo and the students today that today, pahapiaw lang yung mga immersion. At that time, they would really be there for a whole week. Usually, we put only one student per barrio so that they would not be able to talk. They have to talk to the people. We assured them naman that they were safe because the farmers there were good friends of ours. And we had this summer work camp, so they spent a whole month there. So there was a very deep immersion at that time. But of course, what would happen, especially if they went to farms in central Luzon, they could be recruited by the stream left, or they could be suspected by the background. So it was always a delicate balance, and so I had to try to keep distance from it, although I knew about it. So, and then of course we are fortunate. Many people kind of had something against Father Joe Cruz because he was seen to be close to the military and the Marcoses. Not so much with the Marcoses, more with the military. But he protected us. In other words, we were able to do many of those things because he was there to shield us. No? So that was the situation. And then as provincial, of course, there were quite a few Jesuits who were actually with the National Democratic Left. And so I had to deal one-on-one with them and talk about the limits of their engagement. So the society and the church at that time reflected also the divisions in Philippine society. Father Inchengan was the one who was closest to the grassroots. He was there with the Light of Fire movement. I told him that was foolish because their colleagues in the US were talking about it, so the Marcoses knew about it. But anyway, so it was that kind of dance that you had to handle at that time. And for me, the most important thing was to continue to be able to build our student groups. We had because at that time the operations with Ateneo were Office of Social Concern and Involvement and the Center for Community Services. And the Center for Community Services had farmer groups like Pakisama, the group of the Similao farmers. We had worked with the urban poor like COPE. We had work with workers. We had workers college and so on. And so on. So we had also a very intense engagement with what you'd call basic sectors. So that was the Ateneo of the. We were always, in fact, in the Laban elections of 1978, we lost, but there was a big protest march. Our whole student council was in that protest march. They were all arrested in front of Santo Tomas, but with Father Cruz, they were released. But we had to be very careful. And Father Bernas, who was then the provincial, said for me to keep away because I might get into trouble if I visited the students too much. Anyway, that was a delicate.
So Father, it's not true kasi may mga nag-react that the church in this election has become partisan. It's not true that the church is only involved now in the political life of the country. During martial law, the church was very much involved.
Yes, very, very much involved. We're certainly very much involved in the human rights thing. Very much involved with the task force detainees and the bishop, the social action group of the bishops. NASA was very involved. Bishop Escalera they were very, 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 very involved. And Cardinal Sin was very involved in a very savvy way.
So Father, kasi yun nga, mention of Cardinal Sin. Of course, Cardinal Sin became very popular with EDSA, leading EDSA. But the years before EDSA, the church was already very, very much involved.
Yes.
Di lang si Cardinal Sin. And when you became provincial father, of course, you were dealing with other superiors from other religious congregations, and they're very much involved.
A lot were very involved. There were groups, religious congregations that were quite involved with the National Democratic Front. Some were more involved with us. And then when the snap elections were coming, we were able to involve the ones that were at that earlier neutral. They were willing to be part of NAMFREL. They were willing to be there to protect the ballots. So all those pictures of these nuns protecting the ballots and carrying a Santo Niño over the ballot boxes, many of those were initially uninvolved, but they got very engaged in the snap elections.
Father, I want to understand the thought process or processes that you went through during that time, as a leader of the Jesuits and for the congregation, Kasi ngayon po binabatikos na yung simbahan, hindi dapat involved sa politika. But during that time, what how did you think of this concern or this question, the church being involved in politics?
Well, I don't think if I look back to that period, the church of the 1960s, 70s, the decrees coming out of Rome from after Vatican II really talked very much about the witnessing to justice and service of the poor. That was very, very dominant. That was coming already from the whole church, from the Vatican, in the late 60s, early 70s. For the Jesuits, the General Congregation 32 talk about a service of faith and promotion of justice. And as in everything, you have more radical groups like the Cristianos for el Socialismo in Latin America, which influenced us a lot. We were influenced very much by Puebla and Medellin at that period. But and then in the Philippines, the plenary councils began to talk about these things. And for the Jesuits, we responded to it in 1973. We had a whole province congress which really talked about this witnessing to justice and service of the poor. And so what I want to emphasize is that it was very focused on caring for the poor. So the focus right now tends to be very much simply on human rights and the excesses of martial law. That was very real. But the more fundamental engagement that the church and that we had coming from documents in Rome and other places was really the problem of poverty. You have to remember that activism which led to the first quarter storm in the late 60s and 1970s did not begin because of excesses of martial law. It began because of a very ostentatious party of a prominent family. And the students were so angry at this display of wealth because it showed very much it was a slap in the face of the poor to be so ostentatious when there are so many poor. And people have forgotten that then president of the Ateneo de Manila, Father Pacifico Ortiz, maybe he's forgotten as a president, he gave a speech which was quoted over and over again at the Constitutional Convention of 1972, where he talked that we were sitting on a social volcano, the situation of the poor. There was a lot of awareness at that time that this was explosive. This anger of the poor was explosive. Maybe today that's forgotten. There are outlets like Jobs Abroad, but at that time there was a great awareness that this terrible inequality, which we see, very ostentatious wealth and people very painful wealth, was going to lead to a problem. Actually, if you read the column today of Buchanko, he says the same thing today. So that was the context. The context, not only in the Philippines, but worldwide, there was a sense of a world where inequality was, on the one hand, creating a very insensitive upper class, and on the other hand, growing anger among the poor. And the church and the society was asked explicitly from Rome to respond to this. That was our context. But personally, on my part, I went beyond that. I was very interested in the social history of the Philippines. I had studied the communist and socialist movements in the early 1900s. I spent time understanding the farmer revolts at that period and the worker revolts to understand the social context of the Philippines. We have also forgotten that. So and I became very interested actually in social revolutions, from the French Revolution to the Communist Party to I read Lenin and Mao Zedong and so on, because I was trying to understand how did other countries cope with this very painful reality of gap between rich and poor. And all of those came together.
And you said that Father Ortiz coined this term, so the social volcano.
Yes.
Ready to erupt.
Yes.
But how do you respond, Father, to itong mga comments ngayon, reactions about the church being involved in politics? How do you respond to that? Kailangan namin ng pambala, Father, from you.
Well, the church always says that when you get to injustice and immense poverty is an injustice, it becomes a moral problem.
Mhm.
It is not simply a political problem.
Mhm.
Children starving, people living under overpasses, and very low wages, which are where people cannot live, are moral problems.
Mhm.
It is not simply a political problem or an economic problem. And 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 if there is one thing in the Gospels, it is to care for the poor. No, ultimately, in the last judgment in Matthew 25, you're judged by only one question: did you feel? I was hungry and you gave me to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me to drink. It did not, Jesus will not ask you how many did you attend mass every Sunday or how many rosaries did you say. He will basically ask you, did you care for the poor? And so the church has to respond.
Yeah.
How can you ignore the immense poverty and the suffering of so many people? No? So we hope to be there. So the church has to be there on their side. And of course, when you're on their side, you run into problems. At that time, you run into rich landowners
Mhm.
having problems with you. You run into demolitions
Mhm.
just across Ateneo and Ronald's Garden. And you have to find a way
Mhm.
to respond to the need of the poor. So,
Father, during that time, during martial law, did you ever feel you yourself personally, your life threatened, in danger?
small ways. Maybe the one that was closest was already during the snap elections when
Mhm.
because I was provincial and we had put up a backup kind of quick count system in the provincial's office. We had this big antenna and so forth, and we had a group of them, and we thought we'd be raided. We got news would be raided, and we knew that if we did, we'd be sent off to some island. uh, but uh, you have to understand that at that time the drive to do something was so strong that it overcame fear. Yeah, maybe now the fear is stronger, but at that time the situation was such that you were not careless, naman, but
Mhm.
you were willing to take risks. In fact,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, Father. So that's martial law. That's Marcos regime. That's the past. But now let's talk about the present. Our current situation right now. The son of the late dictator now ascends to the throne. He was elected father with majority, more than majority, vote. So, Father, are you surprised at all by this? What the experts call the Marcos resurgence.
Yeah, initially, but I did not realize how well prepared he was.
Mhm.
But in the months before this election, I realized that he and people around him had prepared very, very well. No?
Mhm.
And maybe we were sleeping and not watching. No? But yes, initially, I did not realize how well prepared he was for this. No? I would say that. So yes, it is a surprise. But of course, at a certain point, it was no longer a surprise. It was clear that they had a very good strategy. It's not just the trolls, as I told you in some conversations.
Mhm.
They really understood what the pitch should be
Mhm.
to the poor. They projected that we will give you a better life.
Mhm.
Uh, they, they projected something we say is false, which is really that the martial law years were good years. There's some truth to that. The early part, the Masagana 99 were good years. Eventually, it did not become good, still continue to be good. But they're projecting going back to them. And they tapped into really the desire of the poor for a better life. And as you know, for some majority, really their life is pretty miserable.
Mhm.
And so, if you are in that situation, you will grasp at something that that will give you a better life.
Mhm.
I always tell our Athenians here that look, we talk about the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Well, for the poor are at the bottom. They want security, they want food, they want shelter, want education for their children, and And that's what the campaign, Marcos campaign, focused on. We will give all that to you. And so, in some ways, we say they're wrong, but they're connected to the poor. And,
Father,
yeah.
I have several questions about the resurgence, Father. Number one is people are saying now that the revisionism that happened over time, they were able to rehabilitate their name. You're a professional educator, Father, isa po sa mga sinasabi nila is hindi raw naikalat yung the martial law atrocities, etc., the human rights violation during that time. Parang in textbooks now, in public schools, what you read about the martial law, parang glowing achievements, yung CCP complex, etc., etc. So partly raw to be blamed is yun nga pong that our failure to transmit facts and information about the martial law years.
Well, I have not read those things, but all I'll say is that we have not transmitted our history, period. No?
Yun,
it's not just the martial law years. We have not. And in fact, this was done during Pinoy's term in the K-12 reform and the CHED reform in the 2010 to 2016, where it was reformed. A standalone Philippine history disappeared after grade 5. There is some Philippine history in high school, but it's only part of Asian history. And in the general education curriculum in college, there's no more history. So the truth is that just like we were talking about the answers in Pinoy Big Brother, this very funny, crazy answer. Well, so this one is part of a larger situation, where we really do not make an effort to transmit who we are as a people, and so because the educational system has become so focused on competing internationally, that's been our overall focus, that we really have lost sight of the fact that we must also talk about ourselves, our culture, our history. Even before, when I was provincial in charge of formation, I asked Father Schumacher to introduce a course on the Philippine social problem, so that at least some generations of Jesuit scholastics can learn about the rise of the Communist Party in the 1900s, the Socialist Party, understand farmer revolt, so that they'll understand the unrest and problems of the poor. But I don't know that we continue that. No? So it's not simply the excesses of martial law. We really don't talk about the pain and the sufferings of many of our people during that. I don't know if we even talk about the Second World War. My father was a doctor in the military. He was in Bataan. He was in the Death March. There was a tremendous amount of suffering during that time. I don't know that we even talk. So it's part of the larger problem that we don't really take seriously, understanding who we are as a people and transmitting it to the next generation.
So shouldn't that be an educational agenda for us, Father?
Of course.
Yeah. Yung mga, like for example, I was talking to somebody na the Jews daw will not let you forget yung nangyaring Holocaust sa kanila, no? So they have museums for that.
And they will not let you forget their history, period. And if you visit China, you'll see the same thing. I'm very amazed with the younger people I meet there. They know their history so well, and their history is 5,000 years, and they can talk about it. No?
Yeah. So social media is to blame. Our education, and we are unable to transmit, sabi niyo nga, Father, our identity. What about this, Father? Our failure as well to be with the poor. May nakausap po kasi akong obispo, Father, when they were confronted with this Pulse Asia survey, 1 month or 2 months, every 2 months, diba? Lumalabas na BBM was really surging. His numbers are really up there, And ang isang reflection daw po nila mga obispo, no? Parang bakit we're supposed to be working with the poor and yet iba yung pinipili nila. Parang malayo sila sa atin. What do you think about that, Father?
Well, the truth is that the Catholic Church is very middle class, and our engagement with the poor is very limited. I think in some ways, Iglesia Ni Cristo understands the culture of not the very poorest, but maybe the upper D class, understand them better than we do. If you listen to their sermons, their Filipino is amazingly, it's really wonderful. Our Filipino is translated from English, no? And so the Catholic Church in general is really dominantly middle class, no? And so the culture is there. There are exceptions, of course, there are exceptions, no? But overall, that's where we are. And so, yeah, if there was one thing I wanted to come out of this is to ask my brother Jesuits and to ask Ateneo and to ask the bishops, don't even ask for any immediate results, but spend time getting to know a poor community, spend time to really get to know them, listen to them, talk about these issues with them, listen to their points of view. And because the biggest problem we have is that the divide between us and the majority of our people is it's not just economic. It's really cultural. We're divided by language. We're using English now in here, and English brings us to the world of Netflix. It pulls us outside to other countries, and it does not pull us into talking with other people below. So I see this the big difference between us and our Indonesian Jesuits, because they all use Bahasa. They read the same newspapers with their people. They're all in Bahasa. They watch the same shows. And so they're much more connected with their people than we Filipino Jesuits are with our people, because language is a carrier of culture. It's a carrier of memory. The words are a carrier of memory. But since we use English, the memories they carry are of books we read or someone abroad. They're not of ourselves. So malalim ang problema natin. And so what do? You cannot change language so quickly. But you can begin by really spending time with a poor community. I would say not just a poor individual, but a poor community. Get to know them, talk with them, spend time with them. Try to enter their world. That was actually the goal of Ateneo in the 1970s. We created Office of Social Concern, immersion programs, because we said we wanted to get Ateneans to break out of their middle class world and to really, in some limited ways, enter the world of the poor and see the world from their point of view. So that is an agenda we still have to do now.
Ang galing nga, Father. You've been saying that, and nitong campaign period, Father, you have friends who talk about taga house to house sila, and for the first time they're able to enter nga the household that is poor. Diba, nagugulat sila sa mga nakikita nila doon, at when they hear the stories of the poor, and that's one of the beautiful things that happened during this campaign period.
Yes. So the hope I have is that they'll continue that.
Yeah. So, Father, may nagbanggit sa'yo sa akin na this world of the poor is unknown to them, diba? Dinadaanan lang nila, or diba, kasambahay, etc. But sa isang sermon nyo, Father, tumatak daw sa kanila na you have these numbers about the poor, diba? Figures about the poor, like ilan yung nagugutom na mga bata sa isang araw. Can you just very briefly, Father, share that with us?
Well,
your work with the poor.
Well, I got involved in nutrition and feeding programs because of my work with the public schools. We work with a very big poor schools in Payatas, 4 very big ones, or 5,000 students. And when we began to talk to the teachers, why did the students not come to class, not do well? Sabi nila, gutom sila. And as we probed, we found out yun talaga ang katotohanan, no? And so in Payatas, we found out that some children will have a choice, pwede silang pumasok at hindi kakain, or they will masura, they'll become scavengers and eat something. Similarly, in the rural areas. And so we started on this, and then we realized how big the problem was, the number of very poor. In Metro Manila, typically about 15% of the students in the public elementary school are malnourished. And actually, it's true also in the high schools, especially there. And then, of course, we're just trying to reach now. So that's what we do. So Ateneo Center for Educational Development has started with a kitchen in 2009 or 2010 in Commonwealth Avenue, which was taking care of 4,000 children in 1,004 different schools. And then we have to thank now Senator Sherwin Gatchalian. He saw that and he said, I've always wanted, he was then mayor of Valenzuela, and he said, I've always wanted to do this. And our biggest kitchen was, and it will be in the future, it opens still in Valenzuela. We were doing 16,000 to 18,000 every day, 8,000, half in the daycare centers and half in the elementary schools. So that's one, the hungry. The other one I want to tell you is how much the poor care for each other. The reason we're able to do it for 15 pesos to 18 pesos per meal is because all the work is volunteers. And these are poor mothers themselves, but they care for the children. They care for the children. So what I want to say also that one of the things you find among the poor is that, yes, they're hungry, but they care for the children. And if we find it difficult to spend time with them, these nanais get up every morning at 3 or 4 in the morning to cook for them. So there is a lot of that for the poor as well. And we see this as well in Gawad Kalinga elsewhere. So yun, dalawang bagay. Napakalalim talaga ang gutom among them. And the statistic that 30% of children 0 to 5, we have not reached that group yet, are malnourished, are stunted. That's a frightening statistic. So if their bodies are stunted, very likely their brains are stunted too. So kung itatanong mo kung why they do not do well in school, why they do not do well in PISA, they never had a chance. They never had a chance. Their brains never developed so they could learn. No? It amazes me that we are not frightened by that number. We're not frightened. How can a country, I cannot understand how economists can talk about our becoming a first world country. How on earth can you do that with 30% of your population non-productive because their brains are damaged in their early years? Our economists live in another world. They're not living in the Philippines, no. So these are for me the problems that I see. We're not looking at ourselves. You know? We're not looking at the fundamentals.
So, and yun nga po, I wanted you to talk about that because that's the goal that even with this presidency, that has to remain to be our goal. That remains our goal.
Yes.
Helping the poor, especially our children who are hungry every day and unable to be productive.
Yes.
Kasi Father, I had to mention that because marami pong na-traumatize nitong elections. They're very sad, they're very unhappy, they're depressed, and may mga nagsasabi na, ay, bahala na yung mga mahihirap sa buhay nila, hindi na kami tutulong. Dahil...
well, no. We lived through 14 years of martial law. The elections of plebiscites and so forth. And we always lost until the 14th year, 1986. But we continued because it was for the poor. It was for our people. We were not there to just defeat martial law. We were there because we wanted to do something. In one homily I gave, I said that these programs in the Ateneo did not really begin by opposition to martial law. They began because we were working with farmers and urban poor and so forth, and we needed to work with them. And I think it was Tricia Robredo who said that masakit man. She said maybe it may be very painful, but there is a pain where you give up, yung sinabi mong ganyan, but there's a pain which makes you love more. Which made you realize that you have to continue loving, and that's what we did in the 70s, 80s, and that's what you have to do today. You know, this has to be a call to care even more and to love even more because the need is even greater. No? So in other words, why did you did you just get this campaign to win and to feel better? And are you gonna say kung natalo ka, ayaw mo na? I've seen that. For me, that's sad. No? That's sad.
Yeah.
That's sad.
And you were telling us, Father, last week, sabi mo na, you hope that even if Lenny Robredo loses, you hope that the groundswell of support that she's getting would become a movement,
Yes.
which is what happened nung martial law years.
Yes.
The series of elections that you lost,
Yes.
the losses further emboldened you to organize and
Yes.
to work. Yeah.
And I'm very, very grateful to VP Lenny that's what your call. Sabi niya, hindi pa tapos. Ito lang, simula lang ito. We have to continue. And I hope we will take that call because that's really what we did. I think I mentioned to you that we worked very hard for the Laban elections in 1978. We lost, but it really became the momentum for organization. We organized work, or we kind of increased the number of workers and farmers and urban poor that we work with. And eventually this became the base for us when the snap elections came in 1986. No? That was still 8 years. But, I guess maybe the difference in those years, we were resigned to losing. And so, but we're not going to give up. Maybe today people just expect to win, and when they lose, they give up. So
I have to ask you, Father, what's your secret? Kasi ikaw parang you keep on going, para kang yung advertisement tungkol sa isang battery, Hindi ko lang sabihin kung anong battery, but you're always ticking. You're always moving around. What's your secret? You're never depressed by this loss, for example.
Well, I'm not happy about it. But as Tricia said, what dominates more is your love for country. You don't forget that you're in it because you care for people, you care for children, you care for the poor, and so you go on to that. My own advice to people is that the best cure for your depression is to go out and feed children and take care of them. There's nothing like taking care of someone in need, getting a smile from them, and realizing that little as it is, you make a difference for one life or two lives or three lives. There's nothing better than that to get you out of your depression or your funk. And if more and more of us do that, then eventually it will become a momentum in the future. So the reason that I feel engaged is because I see these people. I was just with Father Bobby in Cabiao, and we turned over 20 houses. And I see these people who I knew were living in terrible circumstances before. And now I see them, the small families, the husband and wife with one child or two children, and now meron na silang sariling bahay. And you can see the joy in their faces. And that keeps you going. that keeps you going because or I join business or restaurant when we pack these vegetables in the Blue Eagle gym, and see some. One time I met some batang ina there, and you can see that we're making a difference in their life. You may say isa lang o dalawa, but you're not helping me. But I tell people, look, Jesus only cured one person at a time or 10 persons at a time. He did not cure everybody. So why should we ask for more? We should be happy that we're able to help a few people. If Jesus was happy with that, we should be satisfied with that and hope that in time everything will go forward.
Yeah. So, Father, what do you see happening in the next 6 years of a BBM presidency?
Well, first of all, I'd have to see who become part of his political family, official family. Because you have to remember that even when Cory became president in 1986, I always tell this story, that President Marcos left on a Tuesday, and I went to visit Cory in Cojuangco building on a Friday. And what you call the trad polls, nakapila na sila. They already had their draft appointment papers. and when the first elections with the new constitution came in 1987, the majority of the winners were the traditional politicians. So, the big question really is not simply then President Cory or ngayon si Bongbong, but who will be there, and so VP Lenny said there will be new elections in 3 years. Can we make a difference then?
Yeah.
You can begin with the local elections. Can you begin to look for candidates on the local level who will really care for the poor and make a difference for them, and support them? We can. I was glad that she said that. Yeah, we have. So sometimes kasi we want an immediate solution, but that is not possible. That is not possible. And so, yeah, I don't know, because we don't have a good track. We do not have a good track record as a country of persevering. No?
Yeah, actually, Father, sa December daw actually is the Sangguniang Kabataan or the barangay election. Somebody was mentioning that to me, but I forgot already because we are so focused on these national elections. Father, what can you give us an advice then to the opposition party or movement?
Well, one is that to really connect with the poor. Simplest thing is to connect with feeding programs, but not just feed the children, but get to know their families, get to know their mothers, get to know their nanas, get to know the people cooking for them. Try to enter their world. Magkaiba talaga ang mundo natin. We really see the world from different points of view. That's one. And then the other one is that you talk about the Sangguniang Kabataan election. Why don't we talk to our Ateneo High School and college students and talk to them about getting engaged in the SK elections? Because as you may know, because there's a lot of money, even for the SK, a lot of the traditional politicians are already using them to train the next generation. So even the candidates for the SK in many places are already part of the dynasties. No? So maybe that's so. You can begin to learn politics there. Learn how to win or lose elections.
Actually, Father, I tell people, and they're surprised, that more worrisome to me than the presidential turnout, election turnout, is the turnout in the LGU levels. According to news, ang dami raw pong nanalong mga political dynasties. So that's so worrisome. In 2019, remember in 2019, the Ateneo School of Government told us that 80% of elective positions went to political dynasties, and that's so worrisome.
Yeah, unfortunately, to achieve anything, you need continuity. You cannot have changing mayors every 3 years.
Yeah, well, yeah.
That's one problem. And unfortunately, because the Constitution of 1987 abolished the two-party system and created a multi-party system, we now have really no real parties. We just have coalitions around an individual and give it a name. So the reality is that a study done by Ateneo Cord about effective cities in Metro Manila, they were also dynasties.
Yeah.
Because they had continuity. So I don't know that it's simply dynasty period. I think you really have to look at whether they're delivering basic services for the people, and support those that are delivering basic services for the people.
Father, what about the church? What would be your advice for us? We are part of the church sector. What do we need to do from here on?
Well, I think the church has to first go back to the same thing of really connecting with the poor, and then beyond connecting with the poor in terms of pastoral, to find a way to connect with them on the social level. So, for example, I was talking to Father Willie Sampson for our mission in Caloocan, that it's wonderful to have the pastoral for the people. But if you want to bring about change, you have to enter the social, which means, for example, organizing the youth. Can you run programs for the youth and then work from there? Because that's where you really influence change. That's where you influence change. So the church has to learn to be with the poor, to be with them, and the church has to learn how to create social programs that reach poverty, that really can organize for elections and so on. So that's a skill that we really need to be, and maybe for us Jesuits as well. Can we learn how to develop social programs? Let's say for the youth in the urban poor areas, because it's really there that you bring about change. That is really, I cite the youth because they are the ones most valuable. You can really, if you really influence them with values, they will pass it on to younger brothers and sisters. Yeah. We have seen this in our communities in Payatas and elsewhere. So that it's a long road, but at the end of the day, you have to imbue new values into people.
Yeah. And, Father, I keep saying that one positive outcome of the campaign and this election, yung activism ng youth for the first time, they got very much involved, and that's very good for the future. Sila na yung magmamana ng ng ating bayan, and for them to feel sad now, it's because they learned during the last few months how to really love their country.
And how do we channel that into positive action now? No?
Father, during this election, naging involved din po, and maraming mga eskwelahan, universities, nagtaya rin ng kanilang mga reputasyon at pangalan. They also became partisan. So for the academic institutions in this country, ano yung advice nyo rin, Father, moving forward?
I think all our institutions have to give more thought to how do we connect our students with the reality of our country, and especially with some poor communities. With the young people I've been working with over the decades, we'd all agree that, for example, Ateneo College of the 1970s, 80s was much more connected with the poor than the Ateneo today. Why? Because the focus of universities, not just here, but all over the world, has been so focused on international competitiveness, rankings, and so on. Our gaze is very much to the outside, to the point where, as I said, in the latest reform in CHED, the effort was simply to have as few required courses as possible so that there are more courses available for specialization. And so we do not, Ateneo has kept history. I'm very grateful for that, Philippine history. But others do not have that anymore. So I think the very first thing that can be done is, how do you balance the focus? How do you balance the focus between competing internationally and attending to the very reality of our country, attending to the needs of the poor and so on? Can that enter more into our curriculum? In the 1970s, the English teachers, for their English essays, they would assign students to go to the urban poor areas, to visit the poor areas, and write their essays on that. There was a lot more effort to connect the curriculum to the reality of our country. No?
Wow, ang ganda, Father. Those are very clear directions. Father, for you, what would be the greatest lesson that we should learn from the elections?
Well, several have said this already. They have noted the cultural divide. Iba talaga ang mundo ng mahihirap. Hindi tayo nagkakaintindihan talaga, pagkaibang mundo natin. And the question is, what do you do about it? I think if we realize, if we face that and say, how does a country move forward where the leaders coming from Ateneo, UP, LaSalle, other schools in the upper 10, 15%, how can they lead the country well if they are culturally, economically disconnected from the people that they're supposed to lead? How can they lead this country when they are not able to feel with the 30% of children who are stunted? How can they lead this country if they cannot really be pained? If they cannot, I think Tricia said something else. She said that you can only lead a country if you're willing to accept the pain of that country. There's a lot of pain in this country.
Yeah.
Are we willing to enter that pain and share in it so that we can walk together? You talk in the universal apostolic preferences of walking with the poor and walking with the youth. Well, walking with them is painful. Their lives are painful. And we're partly to blame for it, so that us with the pain. We know that we are partly to blame for it. So that's painful also to know that we are part of the problem.
Yeah.
But if we cannot accept and accept that pain, we cannot work with them to create change.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think what Tricia said should be remembered.
Do you remain hopeful, Father, about the future of our country, despite everything?
In pockets.
In pockets.
I tell people that I realize that in my lifetime, I can only make a difference for sections. But the country as a whole is really, we are not at the point where I can see the possibility of a larger transformation. A lot more of us have to connect with each other. A lot more have to try to understand what's going on, and so on.
Father, two final questions, Father. Number one, if you'll be given a chance to speak to Vice President Leni Robredo, what would you tell her?
I'd like to thank her for what she said in her pasasalamat to the workers. I'd like to thank her that she says that hindi pa tapos ang laban, because that for me is the most important thing, that her candidacy, her campaign has created a movement, and she says that she will continue with it, and is inviting us to join with her in that. And so for me, what I would say to her, please push that and work that. And maybe for us to encourage people to please listen to yung sinabi niya, and support in every way her drive to to really make what we went through in the campaign into a real movement. She said there'll be elections in 3 years. Are we gonna talk about that? There are so many nasalaylayan na kailangan ng tulong. Can we select one of them and move into that? For me, I'm very grateful to her. That's what she said. Same thing with what Tricia shared. I think those for me are the fundamental things at this point. To be very grateful for the movement that she created, to be very grateful that so many of us engaged with that energy, but to realize that if we really love our country, we have to build on that energy and that momentum and channel it into change on behalf of the poor. That's what we need. We need to find channels now.
Yeah. My final question, of course, Father, is you mentioned a bit earlier, pero what would be your advice now, Father, to those who are heartbroken now, who feel depressed about what happened? They supported Vice President Leni and she did not win. What would be your advice or challenge to them?
Well, the first thing, of course, is that's normal. There was such euphoria, say, in the meeting the advances. So it's natural that after that high and you're defeated, that you feel depressed. You even feel depressed after looking at basketball game. So that's normal. So, but the question now is that having said that, where do you go from there? And I wrote down the quote from Tricia, where she says, "There's a pain and a grief that shows unproductive anger. You can be like some people say, I give up with the Filipino people, they're not worth dying for." I saw a post like that. But there's also a kind that reminds you of how fiercely you cared. So you have to ask yourself, did you do, I'm sure you did this because you care for our country. And you connect with that caring, and that propels you to care and love even more. You have to accept the fact that of course you're depressed. That's one part of you, but try to connect with the part of you that drove you to care for our country and move forward and give of your time and effort for the campaign of VP Lenny, and tap into that and channel it now into some long-term, maybe a feeding program, but maybe a tutorial program, but some program that will connect you with the poor, mga nasalaylayan, that VP Lenny talks about, for whom this whole campaign was anyway in the first place. So yun.
Well said, Father. Okay, so maraming salamat, Father. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
too.
We wala na po tayong oras, pero thank you so much for all the insights you've shared this morning, and of course for being an inspiration for us.
Thank you, Nana.
Salamat, Father.
All for our country. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yan po si Father Ben Nebres, ang aming pong pare sa Kapisanan ni Jesus at ang aming idol. Pagdasal niyo po si Father Ben Nebres, batang-bata pa po yan. Pero kailangan nating ipagdasal ang kanyang kalusugan. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Nana. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father.
Bye.
Hanggang
Bye.
sa susunod po, this has been the Jesuit Hour and Father Nono Alfonso. Have a happy lunch, everyone. Bye-bye.
The Jesuit Hour. Get to know the Jesuits. Discover their spirituality, their history, their ministries. The Jesuit Hour. Anything Jesuit, everything Jesuit. The Jesuit Hour. Radyo-katipunan. News, insights, inspiration. Radyo-katipunan. Down from the hill and down to the world. Radyo-katipunan. The voice of the Blue Eagle.